Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for you today. And with the recent game update 135, which happened a couple days ago on Thursday, we had actually a number of additions to the game, but the two main points I want to focus on, we have finally had the changes to Eye of the Gemini. So the damage being restructured, the healing and supercharged regeneration being restructured on that. I'll hop in the game and share my thoughts and show what those actual changes look like in game. The other major point is that due to the compensation, we had some gifts. Similar if you were around when Venomous Dispenser was changed. They basically auto-leveled players up, auto-boosted if you was rank 160, you automatically got a free 200. They added some seals and catalysts, which they didn't do last time. 50,000 worth of XP, artifact celebration gift. They're also doing an additional gift if you already had your Gemini 200. That's coming later. And then the main point is we have double XP. So that's something actually much more beneficial than just Eye of the Gemini alone. Normally we would not get double XP probably for another like 2-3 months. So they've definitely gone well and above trying to compensate the community for, which I felt like they didn't really need to, considering this artifact's been around for 5 years. But none of that. Let's hop in game. Let's show you actually what the changes are, and let's show you what the direction you should take for this bonus artifact XP. Okay, to address what actually changed with that Gemini, there's two main things to focus on. One for support, one for DPS. For the support is the Caster's Watch change. So restores 2%, 3%, 6% health, but the 0.5, 1, and 3% supercharge for every second. So what that means is that if I was using dash attack or any kind of supercharge before as a tank or healer, I got 2% supercharge regen back every second. As long as I was within the range. Same thing with players. They've changed that now. So it's not a flat 2%. Now it's 0.5% if I use a 2500, 1% if I use a 5k, and then a 3% if I use a 10k. So that's the main change. That's what affects the regen. So in a moment, I'll show a side-by-side comparison in terms of what Eye of the Gemini was before to what it was after in terms of how many supercharges you can get. But that's the main thing to focus on, is that the supercharged regen is drastically lower than it was before. You'll see in the clip here that the amount of supercharges you can use is well less than half. So the whole meta where healers are running 3 2500s just to be able to give like an infinite greens, that's not going to happen anymore. They're not going to have enough regen for that, because they're going to go from 2% on like Pheromone Bloom and Metabolic Boost and Dash Attack Speed Drain to 0.5. So that's the biggest change. Not too many people using 10Ks anyway. But the 1% is half of what it was before. So if you're using like a 5k, like a group shield or whatever, it's half the amount of regen you were getting before. So that's the major change. And just as an example here, I'm in combat. If I use a dash attack, I even have the dash attack head mod in. So if I'm using dash attack now, you'll see the regen here. So barely got any sort of regen from that. There's no way that I'll be able to regen consistently. So before, a tank could pretty much consistently regen through combat and through the head mod, through Eye of the Gemini, constantly have a dash attack on cooldown. Now you're not going to get that. You're going to get probably maybe 4 or 5 dash attacks with Eye of the Gemini, which is still, it's still usable, but at the aspect, it's not a part of your rotation anymore. A lot of people depended on like dash attack or having that stronger shield every 30 seconds in combat, because they're going to have that regardless. Now you're not going to have that. It also makes it slightly harder for Atomic to spam the mass density, because obviously that's going to be a 5k, so you're going to be getting half amount as regen. So it's definitely going to change the rotations up. Now, we can pop over to the DPS side. So taking, from taking a look at a DPS perspective, got to take off supply drop because of the stupid auto scrolling. So we're taking a look at the DPS side. So Pollux Gaze, damage nearby enemies for 8%, 16%, and 30%. And there is one aspect here that isn't shown in the text, is that it doesn't stack. So what I mean by that is before, if a DPS dropped a red circle, basically dropped an Eye of the Gemini circle, you could drop yours on top, and every player could drop theirs on top, and it would stack damage, and you know that's what they're consistently being used to able to do. And once again, I'll show another clip here in a moment to show that as well, how that's not how it functions. So the DPS side, the main thing here is that it doesn't stack. In terms of the damage aspect of it, it's still going to be geared towards, so before it was a flat 20%. So now if I use Speed Drain, I had 20% damage that I did from a player, part of my circle. Now it's 8%. And if I used 5k, like say Circuit Breaker, Berserk, whatever, that'd be 16%. So for 20% to 16%, that's not that much drastic of a difference. Obviously it is, but no one's calculating exactly how much damage they get from Eye of the Gemini. It's just that Eye of the Gemini, in a proper scenario with like all players using allies and pets and supercharged stuff, you know, it's in the millions. An Eye of the Gemini proc used to be in the millions of damage in raids. Now with that, 20% versus 16%, that's not that drastic of a difference. You're still going to get plenty of damage. And then now if you use a 10k, like say like Big Gun or Oblivion, it's 30%. So it's actually 10% more damage. But the way that becomes a larger issue now is the stacking. So I'm going to show an example of the stacking clip here and show you actually what happens if you're trying to use yours secondary or have a player that's going to be using it after the fact. Okay, just to show a brief clip in terms of the stacking, this is the danger now with Eye of the Gemini. So if you're a DPS, so Dummy Thick, my lead mate, is going to drop a circle, then I'm going to use my Neo Venom. I'm in combat, I have a Gemini on, so it's not anything to do with that. But mine is not going to stack. I'm not going to get a circle proc. So he drops his, I'm going to drop Neo Venom, I get no proc. And then I'll do it again, just showing that I have a Gemini with 5-ball barrage. But this is the danger. You have to be the first DPS to drop your circle, or it's not going to stack. That's the main change to the DPS. So they adjust the percentages, but the main change is that you need to be the first EOG to drop, or you're not going to get any proc from any of the DPS. So that's what you have to be mindful if you want to keep using Eye of the Gemini. So the burning question everyone wants to know, should I keep Eye of the Gemini, or should I put it into another artifact during this double XP? That is harder to answer. If you're a support role, if you're a healer and you're constantly using Eye of the Gemini for your healing before, just spamming greens, you can still do that. The green spam hasn't changed, it's just that you get less supercharged regen. Now, the same applies for healer. If you have two healers, you don't want your Eye of Gemini to stack because it would cancel out. But rarely, a lot of content, you have one healer, a lot of content, even if the tank is wearing Eye of the Gemini, it's not even near the healer, so it's not going to cancel out. So really that playstyle hasn't changed. It's just the amount of supercharge you get changed. Because full healing really, like, you didn't really require like a purple healing ray, page density, and trans. Like, you didn't need a full heal build or like override, something like that. It's just it wasn't as practical or even needed to run a full heal build. That may change in the future, maybe for Elite Plus, stuff like that. But I mean, even for all Elite Plus raids so far, healers have been running Eye of the Gemini and Scrap, just to spam greens. So you can still do that. You just have to be a bit more careful with two healers. So just depends on your playstyle. If you want to keep that for healing, you can, or you can get rid of it. It's completely up to you. For DPS side, it's still there. You still get the damage. That you're missing the damage proc on Eye of the Gemini for supercharge. It's still, you're giving up millions of damage in certain situations. But at the same time, you have to make sure you get your circle first. So is it worth like constantly being a Hawkeye on the other DPS to see if they've dropped their circle or if they are going to drop it? Are you rushing into ads to try to prop it so you get it there first and then possibly die because the tank hasn't aggroed the ads and then you basically didn't matter because you're dead during your Eye of the Gemini regardless. So Eye of the Gemini is still just as useful for a DPS, but you have to make sure you're first, which is something you can't guarantee. And if you proc Eye of the Gemini and then you weren't first, then it cancels out, you just waste all that damage anyway. So before the meta was basically going to be trans strat Gemini. No, I say meta, but I was saying trans strat Gemini worked for like 99.9% of builds. Now you don't have that. So Gemini is not going to be an artifact that you want on as a DPS 100% of the time, just because you're not going to have the amount of regen, so it's going to become a swap artifact. So if you weren't artifacts, like for example, if you weren't an artifact swap player, then you can get rid of either Gemini, because the only way the Gemini becomes useful is if you're going to be swapping it right before you use a supercharge to try to time it so that you're not going to overwrite another DPS. So that's where it's going to be as a DPS. If you weren't comfortable swapping arts or don't want to do it without hassle, then get rid of Gemini. It's not going to help you as a DPS. If you are a healer healer or tank, I should say as well. Tank, I don't use a supercharge in all my loadouts. There are some situations I use dash attack or if I was acrobat, perfect poise. So that's going to become more you as a personal as a tank. Really, a tank's not going to have to worry about his greens being overwritten because he's not going to be close enough to the healer in most content. So it just depends if you wanted to have that fallback as a shield. You're not going to be able to consistently use it. It's going to be more for that like kind of oh shit power and being able to hit a supercharge. So that's going to be your choice as a tank. As a healer, really, I would personally still keep it just because nothing's really changed. And when static comes out and electric healers, so static will give a free transformation card artifact to the electric healers, and then you still have an option for a third artifact. So I know some healers will probably use Clarion for the extra shield and healing, stuff like that, but Gemini is still fairly useful for healers. So that's, once again, that's your personal choice if you want to get rid of it. In terms of what options you should be looking at, especially as a DPS, the main swap is going to be Quizlet. So now the rotation is going to be Transformation, Strategist, and Quizlet. For most things, Quizlet's going to help with that supercharge regen on Mega Blast, the Refractor Beam. When you do use the supercharge, you get that extra damage. Quizlet is better than Grim in every single scenario. So if you're asking, well, it should be Quizlet or Grim, unless your gadget's prec, and the only reason why Grim would be using for gadget's prec is the power regen loss that you get from Robot Sidekick. Because the Grim, with Grim at 200, you don't have the power regen disadvantage for using like a pet like Crystal Fury, Robot Sidekick. But that's only for gadget spec, and that's only because they just use so much power. So if you have a decent controller or in a situation where you don't need power, Quizlet's going to be better in every scenario. I've already covered this on the video. Every single mathematical aspect is better for Quizlet than Grim. The other artifact, as a DPS, you want to get this double XP, E-Bomb's Untethered Shadow. Very, very powerful for might. So Amulet had the risk of, when you're in content, Amulet could kill you. So you can die from Amulet procs if you get like a spike of damage, if the healer's not covering it. There's a bunch of different scenarios, but you can die from an Amulet proc. You can't die from an E-Bomb proc. The worst case scenario with E-Bomb, you just run out of power and then you do a little bit less DPS. But actual Amulet can kill you. So it's the same buff. It's going to be the same buff for both. It's just that E-Bomb's a bit more practical because you can manage it a lot better with power. The only downside to E-Bomb is that there's no animation tell for your stacks. You're just going to have to know. You have to watch your power bar to understand what your power costs are to make sure that it is active. Where Amulet at least has an animation. You can tell if it started. You can tell what you're at for 10 stacks. But E-Bombs, you don't. So that's the only drawback to E-Bomb. I don't know if they're going to fix that in the future, but there's just no animation tell at the moment. But honestly, during this double XP, nothing's really changed. We've only had one artifact since. I mean, I still have to mess around with Heart of Isis, but I can't recommend people level that because I still have to do my full review on that anyway. But really, if you are a Gemini and want to get rid of it, you should get rid of Quizlet. So you have Trans Strat Quizlet for your build. Or you can also mess around with E-Bomb, because even Prec DPS can take advantage of Quizlet. As long as you're using a power every 5 seconds, you're going to be proccing Mega Blast. So there's my suggestions: either Quizlet for 99.9% of replacements for either Gemini, or you keep either Gemini, and you also, if you're Might DPS, look into getting E-Bomb. So even though E-Bomb buffs, it's really designed for Might players. Don't try to mess around with it for Prec. If you want to mess around with Prec in terms of a buff like this, get the Ivy ally. But really, E-Bomb is going to be very helpful for a lot of DPS Plus, I mean, technically you can use the whole Dead King Scepter swap on it. That was mentioned in a previous video and code is covered. Now everyone's kind of doing that now with the E-bomb swaps. But so, I mean, that's your prerogative if you want to be in your inventory every few seconds. But really, these are the 2 artifacts you should be looking at. So take care, guys. If you have any further questions, leave them in the comment section below, and we'll see you in the next video.